Well, welcome back to another episode of the New Adam podcast within Man in the Mirror. We are back discussing. We are still discussing homeschooling. We haven't finished covering those topics in our own mind. And today we wanted to sort of get after this question of, is homeschooling a war for the soul? Or is it a war for the that beyond that, like a war to make our kids not fall behind? There's a combative piece to it. This reminds me of a story. My older brother and I were talking one time. This would have been 2003, 2002, somewhere in that range. And I had learned enough about homeschooling and was aware that we didn't have kids. I don't even know if I was married yet. But I just remember thinking, yeah, if I end up in a place where I'm not comfortable with my kids being in public school, we'll consider homeschooling. And I said this out loud at the dinner table, for something. I was like, oh yeah, we're thinking about homeschooling. And my brother just joked. We have the same dark sense of humor. He goes, just long enough to make him weird. And it's interesting because one of the first stigmas, one of the first challenges, is we want to pull our kids out of something that would be perhaps a negative environment for them to grow up in. But we sometimes, the old myth, you might say, the old belief was that you take something from them. What about their relationships with their peers? What about their relationships with their friends? How do you look at those questions when homeschool parents bring those up or potential?
Yeah, I there definitely is this question that I hear when people ask me about homeschool. Like, did your kids get socialized? And I'm like, yeah, so I have two answers to that. First of all, is your kids get socialized by the people they're around. So who do you want your kids to be around? And so when I looked at the schools and I saw the fact that most of the kids that they were around did not come from families that had the same values that our family had. So right away, it's like, well, they're either gonna pick up habits or they're gonna, habits are contagious. So it's gonna go one way or the other, right? And
Right.
you would hope that my child is going to be the one that other people follow rather than my child being a follower. But, every kid is both at different times and you can't rely on that. And I've heard people say, well, Christians need to keep their kids in public school so that they can they can learn to be salt and light. And, I think that sounds good academically. It sounds good, like sort of moralistically. But it's your kid. Like when it's your kid,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, no, my kid's not ready for that. That's a big weight for me to put on my 8-year-old. Like, hey, your job,
Yeah.
8-year-old child, is to be the light of the gospel in your, in this dark place that I could be sending you to. And by the way, this doesn't just have to be public schools. Private schools can be just as bad. I remember when we were thinking about what we were going to do. Yeah, every year we would think about what we were going to do with our kids. And there's a very well-regarded private school here. And so they had to get tested to go into it. And so we thought, well, let's just go get the test and then we'll figure out. And that's when we found out that they were both pretty smart. But the educational psychologist that tested our kids said, don't put your kids in this school. And we said, why? And she said, you can never, like, I'm not going to say her name, and this was a while ago, but she said, the families that send their kids to that school, these are her exact words, are excruciatingly wealthy. And your kids will be around other kids who are incredibly materialistic.
Yeah.
And
That's a challenge in my kids' school district.
yeah,
Kids getting full-on Teslas at 16. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, I don't want my kids to have those values. I'm not going to put them in a crowd that has those values. So I think that's the first thing. Like, every kid is socialized. What do you want them to be socialized to? Do you?
And just hear what you just said, which is just because they slap Christian on the front of it doesn't mean it's necessarily what's going to be best for your kid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the flip side of that is, like, again, if you're, this goes back to the, if you're going to be isolated, if you're using homeschool to isolate your kids, that's not healthy. I remember when our kids went to high school, they both decided to do 9th and 11th grade in the public high school. And I went in to meet with our guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor was incredibly antagonistic towards me at the very beginning. And finally, I just said to her, like, what's going on? Why are you seem to be like angry? And she said, look, I'll be honest with you. Most people that come in like you do when your kids are, 15 and 17 or 14 and 16, and you want to put them in school and they've been homeschooled, what it means is that you haven't been educating them and now you have a problem and you want us to solve your problem. And I said, "Oh, you don't have to worry about that. Like you can test my kids up one side and down the other. I bet you they'll blow most of the kids their age away." I said, "My kids are very well educated." And she was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I just, you know, I, so many people that come in here with homeschool kids, their kids they're isolated. They don't have social skills. But our homeschool experience is way different than that because our kids were always around other groups of kids that were being homeschooled and their parents. And so
Mhm.
this is one of the things that I have noticed about all my kids' friends and my kids. They were at a very early age comfortable being around adults, and they knew how to speak to adults. They knew how to be polite. They knew how to um, carry on a
There's
conversation.
something about that. Yeah, there's something about that when a kid can order his own meal, like, at the Publix sub aisle line.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, "Get up there and talk." Like, "You know how to
Or they
speak?"
go to
Yeah.
their friend's house and they strike up a conversation with the parent that's like 10 or 15 minutes long and pleasant, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And nobody's like, because the stereotype is, oh, I just deal with my parents for as quickly as we can so we can go do what we want to do. But with our kids and our kids' friends, it was like, no, family's important. And so when my daughter had a homeschool, a friend over, or my son had a friend over, like we hung out with them. We hung out with them. We're like, hey, how you guys doing? And tell us what's
Yeah.
going on. And, so I think the socialization side is much more, it's what you make of it, right?
Yeah.
If you isolate
Yeah.
your kids, then they're going to be weird. Um, but if you use this as an opportunity to actually engage your kids in more adult activity, we infantilize children. We treat them like they're something other, and they're not. They're just they're on their way to being adults. And so
Yeah.
your job
That's
is
how
not.
they used.
Yeah,
Yep.
my job was never to teach my 12-year-old to be a 12-year-old. My job was to teach my 12-year-old how to be an adult.
Yeah, they teach you what being a 12-year-old is like with all their stupid lingo. Like they will remind you
Yeah,
of what it's like to be a 12-year-old.
yeah, no cap.
Your job is just like that's a very important thing, especially for fathers. Is people are like, well, when do you give fatherly advice? Just whenever you're like, hey, when you get older, this is going to be the norm for you. Like always pointing them to some future. Like, hey, buddy, you were up late and you got to be up early tomorrow for an early thing for school. Like, hey, some days that's work,
Yeah,
and a man puts his chin out and says, "Let's go."
yeah,
And you just see them going, okay. Um, and isolation never does much for kids.
no,
It usually distorts.
yeah,
Not to be weird, but there's this new Netflix thing called about Ed Gein. Have you seen this?
no.
It's this news thing that they did one. I think it was on either Ted Bundy or
Wow,
Dahmer. And the show is called Monster, and then they kind of recreate and dramatize a notorious
yeah,
killer. This guy named Ed Gein. There's a point to the story, but he is the inspiration for both the movies Psycho and Silence of the Lambs.
wow,
Like like he is one of the truly terrifying stories in human history.
wow.
And but I bring it up. This is the word isolation because I've been freaking out friends and family by talking like him around them. But his story, his story
Hello,
is
hello,
he was.
Clarice.
Yeah, well, he is the hyper isolated.
Right.
He was psychological torture and torment. I mean, the poor
Yeah,
guy in many ways. But his mother told him that everyone was the devil. Women were trying to get him. Only stay home. It's only for him.
yeah,
And that's obviously a disgusting,
right,
terrible story. But let's be honest. That's an extreme case of what too many people are thinking, which is my kids need to be kept sheltered, bosomed up.
right, right.
There's another piece too in homeschooling, and I saw a bit of this when I was in seminary. which is that you're just treating your kids like the childhood you wish you had had. And I knew this older guy. He was probably 30s, 40s when I was young in seminary. He would bring his son around, and he was homeschooling the son. And he was so excited that his son could read and study the books at the seminary level. And he was like reading like Copleston's History of Philosophy. And this kid was like 9. And I was just like, come on. And you're just going, that's awesome. But I settled in on a phrase after watching that and learning this in my own life, going through PhD work. Education is not sanctification. And I think that's an important piece that we have to like really stick in there for homeschooling. Like,
Yeah, that's really good.
there is no amount of curriculum, no perfect. You can be Dumbledore,
Yeah.
and have the perfect curriculum, but it is not itself the sanctification that your kids need.
No,
There's a formation,
there's
and
plenty of
yeah,
smart evil people. I mean,
plenty of smart evil people. That's right. That's right. So your goal has to be something holistic. It has
yeah,
to be, I want to form my kids into being the adults that they need to be.
yeah, yeah. I think formation's a great way to look at it. And just thinking about like how do I engage my kids with what's going on around them? How do I engage them with the culture? Because the fact is that when they're in school, that's not an accurate view of culture. Just whatever's happening in the context of the four walls of the school with you know a population of people that's mostly their age and their level of maturity. But engaging
Yeah,
them
right.
in a broader world, and homeschooling, you can choose what you do, but like, do you want to engage your kids in current events, or do you want do you want your kids engaged in current events by a teacher who maybe is, doesn't believe the same things that you believe or think the same way that you think,
Yeah.
or kids that are so immature that they're they just don't know how to really get to the core issue of anything.
Yeah, I find myself more worried about the other kids than I am sometimes the teachers.
Yeah.
But I live in a very conservative part of Florida. But, I'm sure if I lived elsewhere, I might be more
Yeah,
wondering what the teachers are
I
saying.
grew up in New England, so pretty liberal up there even then when I was a kid a long time ago. It was pretty liberal, and I didn't realize it at the time. That's the other thing. Like when you're a kid, you don't know. Whatever the adults tell you is true. So,
That's true.
I lived in a I lived in a liberal enclave that I've realized in retrospect a couple things that I always assumed were true were actually they weren't. They were just opinion, and they were just like a stilted way of looking at things.
Hmm.
And I think I'll give you an example of this right now is this whole idea of the way you make somebody feel or the way that somebody feels is the highest and best good, right? Like the highest truth is how somebody feels. And that there's 1,000 ramifications of that. But the biggest one is this: you begin to believe that you should be judged by your intentions rather than by your results. And
Yes.
I don't know about you, but the world don't work that way. You're judged by
No.
your results. You can have the best intentions in the world, but if you don't accomplish the things you're supposed to accomplish, you're going to lose your job, or you can have the best intentions in the world, but if you say the wrong thing or neglect your family or your spouse, like that's going to harm your relationship. And you can't just keep going, oh, well, I was going through stuff. That's that's selfish and stupid.
Stupid and impossible to maintain long term.
Yeah.
Um, I do think a lot of that. Well, I'd go even further because it's the one thing to say like, well, I'm going through something. There are always these famous cases. There's one recently of like there's a famous YouTuber or something, one of these celebrities, and he got called out for bad behavior. And of course, the first thing he says is, "Well, I was going through a lot." And
Oh yeah.
I was very I was very happy to see people were like, "No, we're tired of that argument. Like
Right.
it doesn't
Right.
like I do think it's starting to correct back,
Well, and I'll tell
but
you, if you're listening to this and you have small kids, you're probably a millennial.
yeah,
And the
true.
millennials suffered the most from this, I think, from the idea of what you feel is as important or maybe more important than what the facts are. And this is why I think millennials are struggling so much, is because they're coming to the realization that what they were taught about the way the world works and what they were taught about the way their emotions, the primacy of their emotions, they're finding out that it doesn't work and they're miserable, and it isolates you. So that's, you're isolated because everybody's living in their feelings as opposed to figuring out how to live in community, which by definition requires sacrifice and putting other people's interests even or higher than your own.
Higher than your own.
And they can't do it. They can't do it. And so, like, if you're listening to this right now and you're so frustrated, this may be what's going on. And don't do that to your kids, man. Like, let your kids, I mean, yes, you deal with your kids' feelings. It is important to acknowledge their feelings. It's not saying like be cold, but don't act like their feelings are the most important thing, because you're just setting them up to be miserable later on.
Yeah, I feel like a little too much. I'm right on that line. I don't think I have a generation. Like I'm too young to be Gen X. I'm too old to be millennial. And but for the millennial, like my younger brother's about 7 years younger. He's definitely in millennials, and because he acts like one. And but one, not him, but when I see the kind of millennial style, too often what I see is this, or the argument I see, it always starts with a misunderstanding of how bad it quote used to be, and then they just do the opposite. So in this case, I hear all the time, well, older people, boomers, never talked about their feelings. They just stifled their feelings. So we're going to now only, you then just kind of flip the other way, and it becomes, gentle parenting, and my kids' feelings are just as valid, yes, but just as controlling of the room, as an adult, which is a different thing than being valid. And I have found myself, because I'm blessed to have started kids a little bit later because of my PhD. Like,
oh, you have a PhD?
Nah.
I didn't know that.
I don't mention it.
Where'd you get it?
Nowhere. Doesn't matter. It is funny. I spent a lot of time writing that dissertation. No one read it. It's funny. I used to always joke, my mom didn't even read it. She didn't care.
What was it
I
about?
was teasing. Dissertation. It was I was so in the early Reformation, all early Protestants argued that we are to submit to the political state in all matters.
Oh,
100%.
in all matters?
In all matters, and in matters of faith, if they challenge you, the only recourse is death.
Wow.
And they believe that up from like the beginning. So it's actually Reformation Day today, oddly enough, as we're recording it.
Yes.
But from 1517, when Luther started, until about 1531, 32. So like that real brief time, they all said that.
Wow.
And then they kept getting killed, and they were like, some political resistance. So I chart why that happens. But
maybe we could post your dissertation on the Man in the Mirror website, and
that would be we'll get 2 clicks.
Yeah.
My mom will watch this and now finally go read it, and you'll look for. But no, but the whole the I forget where I was going, but the whole point of what we were talking about is
you got to start late with your kids.
Well, I started late. Yeah. But the point that's really great is I find myself, how can I say this? I'm dealing with at least 2 of my kids so late in my life that I've already picked up on some of the problems that I think millennials have had with younger kids when they try to over gentle parent.
Yeah.
Which is, I want to be gentle, but I need to be like pointing them towards correction.
Right.
Like I'm finding that middle space where it's like I don't have to be an ogre. Like you said, a dad, I can just go, hey, and like they're like that's often enough to get their attention. But what I'm finding is I need to point them towards an adult maturity.
Yeah.
And my son, just yesterday, was having a little bit of a. It was 2 days ago. He was. I was talking about something, and he wanted to talk about something else, and he was having like a aggression within himself. Like he was just like almost super impatient. You know that guy testosterone thing. And I was able to stop and say, "Hey, son, just let me point out to you that feeling you're having right now. Every man has that a lot, and it's the mark of a man that you learn to control that." And I just let it go. I was just like that. And this is a little bit far afield, but I think that's the point of where homeschooling is supposed to go. It's not to make them perfect. You never can. It's not to keep them out of the world. Good luck.
Right.
The point is to get them ready to be an adult.
Right.
And what I think homeschooling has become for a lot of people is they're not confident that public schools do that anymore.
Yeah. I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that school as it is today has at least for the last 10 or 15 years has not done that.
Yeah.
It's created its own reality, and you learn how to cope within that reality versus like what it should be, which is a microcosm of actual culture, so you can learn how to function in that in a place like this. This is my premise about college. Like, college is not a place where you go to learn how to have a career. Like, it's a place where
You should already know what career you want.
yeah, it's a place that you go to get 4 years older in a relatively safe environment where there's a lot of relational dynamics and performance requirements that you have to figure out how to adhere to. And then when you go out in the real world, you're like, oh yeah, I have to get things done on time. Oh yeah, I have to get along well with people. Oh yeah, I have to keep my room clean. Like, you've had a place that you got to practice all those things with relatively low low risk.
Florida schools are not known for that, though. No, that's Florida colleges, but no, but and the only I think at the end of the day, people that are looking to go to homeschooling, the only thing you don't have is not related to the curriculum or the formation. Those things parents, I think, can easily do a significantly better job. The thing that they're often missing are things like coaches, media centers,
right,
opportunities to learn auxiliary skills like music, art classes. Those things that are sometimes, at least in good schools, still factored. How did you handle that? Like, did you feel like there was a gap?
No, we found all that. So my rule, I had a rule. For instance, I had a rule that my kids always had to be taking an instrument, learning an instrument, and playing a sport.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, well, you have to play a sport and you have to play an instrument. So, my daughter played piano and played soccer at the beginning, and then got into rock climbing. And my son played lots of different sports and mostly soccer. And then he got into rock climbing, and then he played everything. My daughter took 3 years. This is a total tangent here. My daughter took 3 years of piano lessons, and she was like 11, and she sat down with her brother, who was 8, maybe 10 and 7. And she showed him what she was doing on the piano. And like, I hear playing coming out of the room where the piano is. And then my daughter storms out of the room, and I realized it's my son playing. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, he's never taken a lesson. I've been taking lessons for 3 years, and he's already better than me. I'm never playing piano again. And I'm pretty sure she didn't play piano again after that. Like, just wasn't her thing,
Oh no.
So anyway, so my kids got a lot of socialization also from their sports, and we put them in coaching. We put them mostly in, like, I was very careful or very aware of the coaching that they got. So my son had an amazing Little League coach. Shout out to Terry Petty, like, just a great guy in Little League. My daughter played in a Christian youth soccer, youth sports league, and so she had great coaches. And then I got involved in coaching. So sports was a great way for my kids to both get socialization with other kids, as well as coaching from people that I paid attention to who their coaches were. So, for instance, my son had a great Little League coach, Terry Petty. for 2 or 3 seasons maybe of Little League. Then he got a different coach that was terrible. So I made sure I was around all the time when he was on that team. I just tried to be there as much as possible. And my daughter got great coaching. She joined a Christian youth sports league. We had a Christian youth soccer league here, so she was in that, and Jackson did too. So it was just they were around good people. And then I didn't do as good a job of this with my daughter, honestly, as I did with my son. But I made sure that my son had mentors around him, and I knew that this worked. I knew that I'd been effective at it when he was a senior in high school. His birthday was in April, and so we had a birthday party for him. And I said, Jackson, I want you to invite, 5 to 8 men that have had a big impact in your life. And for your birthday, I'd like to have them come and just, tell you about, you can thank them for being important in your life, and they can maybe all share a word of wisdom with you. And he's like, that sounds like a great, he loved the idea.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we did a backyard barbecue. We had, they came over. I told them no presents. This isn't that. One of them still brought a present. So here's how the night ended. I had told them all, like, please bring 2 things to share with Jackson. One is a funny story, and the funnier that you can make it about him, the better. Like, and then 2, what's some kind of word of wisdom that you would like to give Jackson before he goes off to college in a few months here? And so we get these guys there. We had the barbecue, and then we make a fire pit in the backyard, and we're all sitting around the fire pit. And so the Lord directed me to look left instead of right. So I looked left, and I said to the guy to my left, hey, let's go around and share the things that I asked you guys to share with Jackson. And so sitting around the circle were like his youth pastor, his former youth pastor, his former his first guitar teacher, another guy that really discipled him as a worship leader and youth group, his small group leader, and then the last guy, believe it or not, was his Latin teacher from the public high school. Because in Florida, you can take 2 classes. If you're a homeschooler, you can take 2 classes in the public school. And so Jackson took Latin all 4 years because he met this teacher the first year and just really, really liked him. And he was a great guy. He was 45 and single, and he's a public school teacher and a little effeminate. So you can draw your own conclusions. Yeah. But so we went around, and by the way, he's the only one. He's the one that still brought a present. He wanted to bring Jackson a book that he thought would be meaningful. And so we go around to all these guys, and then we get to this Latin teacher. And and he doesn't say anything, and so I look at him, and he's weeping. And he looked at Jackson, and he said, like, husk, kind of that, trying to keep control of his voice, He said, Jackson, now I understand why you are such an amazing young man. When I look at these men, and you had all these men in your life, and he said, I never had that. And he said it 3 times. Wow. I never had that. I never had that. And like, he's like, just be grateful that you have these men, and that your dad, that your dad loves you, because I never had that. And I was like, all right, thank you, Lord. Like, it worked. Like, right. Like, like you had good men in your son's life. And like, I look at my son now, and I see an amazing young 28-year-old man who's a dad and a husband, and making a career, and figured out, he's been willing to take risks and try 3 or 4 different things, to figure out the right career. And and he's wise, and yes, I'm his dad, but man, all those different guys had such an impact.
He needed, in those areas, he had grace.
Yeah, yeah. And he would I mean, he found the one good teacher,
Yeah,
but he
yeah,
wouldn't you're not gonna have that. You're not gonna have you're not gonna be like, oh, my son's 10th grade English teacher and his 11th grade social. I mean, that's not gonna happen. But because of the way that we lived our life, he had those men in his life. And my daughter didn't have as many good female mentors in her life, but for my son, it was a huge thing.